We've all been in those panels. You know, those panels that just skim at the surface and they never take the topic deeper where the audience wants to go. You've been there. So have I. My name is Kristin Arnold, and I am a master facilitator as well as a leading authority on panel discussions. And so we don't want your panel to stay at the surface level. Let's figure out how to take a deeper dive. As a panel moderator, there is a distinct art to probing deeper. It's more of a combination of instinct, like, ooh, that's interesting, that's juicy, as well as you're looking at the audience and they're kind of leaning in, wanting to know more, as well as your own skill at checking out how specifically to probe deeper. In this video, I'll be sharing 6 different methods on how you can probe deeper into a topic in your panel discussion. So let's dive right in. As a panel moderator, you have your list of questions that you want to ask. It is more than just ask the question, get a response, ask the next question, get a response. You're actively listening to what the panelist is saying, as well as observing what the other panelists are doing. Are they leaning in? Does it look like they want to add to? Are they leaning back, curious or not in agreement? It's about picking up on those cues, as well as looking at your audience, picking up on the cues that they're sending you about, is this interesting? Is it not? Is it old stuff? Is it new stuff? And so you have to make a decision whether it's appropriate to probe further or to let it go. So here are 6 different ways that you can probe further. Sometimes you just want to advance the conversation. So you'll pick up a key word that was said during the panel discussion, and you'll ask a follow-up question. For example, a panelist might say, I found that was really disturbing. And you go, oh, well, tell us, what was the most disturbing piece of that? So you're digging in a little bit deeper. You can also extend what has been said. So maybe somebody said something and you go, oh, that's an interesting point. Could you tell us more about that? Another technique to advance the conversation is to probe for more information. For example, if there's a little nugget of information dangling, you might say, oh, that's interesting. Tell us more about that. So you're advancing the conversation. Something has already been said, and you're extending the conversation into a deeper realm. A second technique to advance the conversation is a series of ideas about advancing the plot. So, for example, a panelist is telling a piece of information with maybe a story attached to it or something that makes you want to say, go on, tell us more. Well, if you're leaning in, thinking in your head, go on, tell us more, is the audience leaning in and you're seeing that they're subliminally saying, go on, tell me more? Well, then simply say, go on, tell us more. Notice I use the word tell us more versus tell me more. It's a much more inclusive way of phrasing those kinds of questions. Another technique to advance the plot is to reflect it. So let's say Maurice has had a strong opinion about something. You can then reflect it to another panelist and say, so, Tahira, do you agree with that opinion or do you disagree? What that does is it allows an opening for a conversation to advance the plot. Sometimes you as the moderator, you also have some experience and expertise in this field. Every once in a while, you might want to stick your toe in the water and say, well, here's a piece of information that I know about this topic. What do the rest of you think? So again, you're tying that piece of information to something that's already said and then asking people to advance the plot to extend the conversation. You can also advance the plot by digging deeper. Let's just say a panelist says something that either based on your experience or your instincts, you just kind of go, that doesn't sound quite right. But it is not your role as a moderator to challenge a a panelist. Now, if I'm a panelist, I can certainly challenge another panelist and say, that doesn't sound quite right to me because in my experience, I have this and this and this. You could, in fact, as a moderator go, that's an interesting perspective. Is there another perspective that we might consider? So rather than saying to somebody, you're not right, well, in their mind, they are. You could just say, is there another perspective? So you're digging a little deeper. The other piece that when somebody says something that you kind of go, you can think about it from the audience's point of view. If somebody is making a claim, if you're in the audience, you would want to know, well, what's the metrics? What's the statics? What's the statistics? What's the substance? Where's the source? So you could simply, for the audience that might want to follow up on this later, is, so where's the source for that claim? Another way to advance the plot is to look for the areas of disagreement. Well, Maurice, you said this. Tahira, you've said this. There is some areas of disagreement. And let them hash it out. That makes it interesting. So you're actually identifying the areas of disagreement and suggesting that they have a conversation about it. That's stirring the pot. But what if your panel is in complete agreement? Well, a panel in complete agreement makes for a pretty boring panel. So you could ask for a devil's advocate, where you ask a panelist to be the devil's advocate for everyone in agreement. So if everybody's in agreement, you could say, so Brian, why don't you play the devil's advocate? If you had to disagree with what everybody is disagreeing about, maybe there might be some people who are devil's advocates in the audience. What would you be saying to them right now? So now you're getting a different voice that might actually be representative of the audience. So we've talked about advancing the conversation and advancing the plot. Now we're going to talk about focusing the conversation. Because sometimes to dig deeper, you have to really focus like a laser on what it is that you want to dig deeper about. So one of the first things that you can do is to clarify the point that they're trying to make, especially when a panelist is being too vague. You can really narrow down their focus by asking one of the 5 W's and the H question. Who, what, where, when, why, and the H. One of those questions can provide kind of that focus to clarify. Sometimes to focus the conversation, you might actually catch some contradiction. So you might say, well, Charlie, I heard you just say this, but earlier you said this. Or in one of your articles that you've written, that you did during your research, you said this. Help us understand. That's another way to provide that kind of clarity. This is my favorite one, is to get them out of the bug dirt. Scott Helford gave me that term. Thanks, Scott. And you know how some people are just in the weeds. They're in the bug dirt. They're in the tactics. They're into way too much detail. We need to elevate the conversation to either be more strategic or more general or more appropriate for the audience. So sometimes you just have to okay, let's pull it up a notch. Let's take it to another level. On the converse side, you might have some panelists who their heads are way in the clouds. They're always talking at the 30,000-foot view, and they're not bringing it down into a tactical application, benefit, takeaways for the audience. So sometimes you have to ask them, so what's the practical takeaway that our audience can take from this discussion? Finally, to focus the conversation, you might want to just check for understanding. Every once in a while, a panelist will say something, and you think they're meaning one thing, but it could mean another thing. And honestly, if you're having those thoughts in your head, you are the champion for the audience. I bet the audience is having the same thoughts in their head. So you might want to check for understanding. And just say, so what I'm hearing you say is that correct? And if it is, they'll say, yeah. If it's not, they will then rephrase it so that everybody can understand and get a clear understanding of what that panelist is trying to say. So these 3 strategies, they're really about reacting to the conversation. Before we get into really changing the conversation, digging deeper. I'm just curious, have you ever used these techniques? Have there some other techniques or a particular phrasing that you like in order to advance the conversation or advance the plot? So if you would, just put it in the comments below. And while you're there, if you would like this video and or subscribe to it, that would be awesome. Okay, so we've talked about advancing the conversation, advancing the plot, and focusing the conversation. Now we're going to get into a couple of disruptive methods where you can provoke the conversation. Provoke it into a deeper, more meaningful level. So the first technique is about synthesizing the conversation. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One of my favorites is to build bridges. So one panelist said X, another panelist said Z. That would maybe lead you to Z. So you could say, well, this panelist said this panelist said that. I'm assuming that this is the next conclusion. What do you think? You are building a bridge between two ideas and leading into a third idea. That's a disruptive synthesization type of technique. Another technique is to connect the dots. So you have a panelist who said this and a panelist who said another thing. And you go, oh, are those the same? Are they dissimilar? Are they connected somehow? So you are actually elevating two comments that were made at different times in the panel and asking for similarities, compare, contrast. So you're disrupting the conversation by bringing those two elements together. You could also test the unsaid. Now, I don't use this technique very often, but sometimes there is a proverbial elephant in the room, something that is not being said, but in your pre-work, something needs to be said about this because it came up in all of our pre-work and no one actually said, please don't bring that up. Now, sometimes you do have those things that just from a meeting organizer standpoint or the panelist said, please don't bring those up. Might be a legal restraint or a fiscal type of rule or regulation. Fine. But if nobody has said, don't bring that up, a very effective way to disrupt the conversation and dig a little deeper is, I'm just wondering, I'm seeing this, and this. I heard this, and this, and this. I'm wondering if this might be happening. And then you just be quiet and the audience will make some noises. The panelists, somebody will speak up and say, nah, that's not a big deal, Kristin. Or, yeah, that is a big deal. And let me tell you why. It's a great way to disrupt the conversation. I would use it very judiciously, though. Finally, a way that you can synthesize the conversation is to kind of take a poll. Ask for areas of agreement from the panel. How many of you agree with what Mike said? Disagree? That could be just a quick show of hands or go around the room. Or you could even take a poll of the audience. How many of you agree with what Mike said? A very simple raise your hand. How many of you agree? Raise your hand. Look out in the audience and you go, what? It looks like 80% of you agree with what Mike said. But there is 10% that's saying not so much. That can advance the conversation. The last strategy, it's a disruptive strategy, is to make sure that you aim for application. My experience with a lot of panels is they stay at a pretty high level. You want to make sure that you dig a little deeper, so that's what we've been talking about in this video. So it usually starts out with a strategic, and then there's some benefits or consequences, and then there's some neat discussion, stories, anecdotes, and then if you haven't gotten to some tactical takeaways for the audience, you want to make sure that you are getting some takeaways for the audience. Otherwise, it's just been a lovely conversation, but what are they going to do with it? So one of the ways that you might want to aim for application is to ask the 5 W's and the H. Just how does this conversation relate to the real world? What would you have people do? Why would you have them do it? How would you have them do it? Where would you have them do it? Who's the right person to do it? And I'm missing the other W. These are extensions to dig a little bit deeper, but they are about applying it to the audience's life. Also, when you aim for application, I always like the last question to be something about application for the audience. Like, what's the one takeaway? What's the one thing that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get a chance to talk about? What's the one thing that you want the audience to think, do, or feel as a result of this conversation? If we were to come back in 5 years, what do you hope that we are talking about? What do you hope that we are no longer worried about as a community here? Those kinds of things are all about application. Final thought is that when you are digging deeper, you don't want to keep digging. You need to dig yourself out. And so you want to use some segues or transition to help bridge the gap between one segment of your conversation and the next segment of your conversation. So when you've covered a topic well enough, just say it's time to shift gears and move into the next piece of your panel discussion. So before you move from one topic to another, you just might want to try to summarize what has been said and then shift to the next topic. Or you could simply shift gears and say, we're going to shift gears now, and we're going to focus on this piece. Either way, you are shifting, you're making a segue from one piece of the topic to the next topic, or to the Q&A, or to the closing. So you're providing those segues, those transitions. So that's how you dig deeper into a panel discussion. I hope you got a couple of ideas. If you did, put them in the notes. Maybe like this video, maybe even subscribe to the channel. And if you want more information about how to moderate a panel, I have a free 7-part video course that you can subscribe to at www.howtomoderateapanel.com. Thanks for watching.